Okay, so this morning we've heard some very nice introductions to the topic. By now, if you did not know what an ERN is, you know all about them, I hope. And basically the plan is now we're in the session where we really focus on the ERNs themselves and what they're actively doing around research, specifically clinical research. So myself and Helen have the honor to chair this session, which is also very packed, so we will stick to time rather fiercely. Our first presentation is entitled Snapshot of Transversal Activities Regarding ERNs and Clinical Research. Now, this is a 3-in-1 presentation, and there was a particular purpose behind this presentation. We've heard what the legal acts say that the networks need to do around research, clinical research. This has given us some ideas. We're about to go deeper in a few moments into what specific networks are actually doing, so what the 24 ERNs are prioritizing and planning. But in the background, as you'll have noticed already, there is a whole host of activity and initiatives and working groups which are looking at ERNs and research per se, so very much disease agnostic. And I think that when we're looking at where the networks can add value, it's very important that we know what's happening within, for example, the research working group, that we know there is an ethics working group, that we know what the Board of Member States' perspective is here, and that we also know a little bit about some of the initiatives which hopefully are coming up, which will complete this picture and take us forwards. So our first speaker in this 3-in-1 presentation is Eduardo López Granados, who is the chair of the ERN Research Working Group. He's also the coordinator of TRANSPLANT-CHILD ERN, which is pediatric transplantation. So Eduardo, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Victoria. So we already heard from Mauricio, and you had the opportunity to have a very nice overview about the ERNs, their design, and their objectives and their goals. So as you heard, there are many activities that we need to take, and there are many areas that we need to address. So as Helen also said, research is one of the goals that should be present in the different ERNs. And although we provide clinical care, virtual clinical care, we obviously are groups of experts in different areas with multidisciplinary approaches, and we are in an excellent position to identify research gaps and trying to work together to implement or to develop research activities. So, as I said, the different activities that all the ERNs want to take together are being organized in different working groups. So the research working group is the largest working group in the ERN coordinators group. From the beginning, we thought that the number of activities that we should take probably will benefit from a co-coordination of the group, and then also as a way to put together our different capacities and trying to share the effort of leading different initiatives. How we are organized is that there are currently 4 co-coordinators: Luca Sangiorgi, who is here present, Alberto Pereira from the ENDO ERN, and Franz Schaffer from the ERCANET, and myself, that I'm acting this first year as a spokesperson or coordinator of this working group. So our scope is that as healthcare providers across Europe, we obviously try to tackle complex and rare diseases and conditions that require highly specialized treatment, but the appearance of the 24 ERNs has provided an unprecedented platform in Europe, never present before, that allows now much better identification of preclinical, translational, clinical research gaps within their different areas of expertise of rare diseases and complex conditions. And the idea of the working group is trying to work together to promote, support, or even lead research initiatives in collaboration with different stakeholders. And today is an example of this, such as patients associations, industry research institutions, pan-European infrastructures, and policymakers. So ERNs are constituted by many, as you heard, hundreds of different healthcare providers. Many of us are physicians working in, these are usually university hospitals. We are most of these or many of these institutes or hospitals are linked to research institutes. So at the end, through the networks and the capacity that we have to pull data from patients, I think that we could try to catalyze many of the research initiatives that could benefit from this capacity now of working together. So the idea of the working group is just that not each ERN could do their efforts by their own, but trying to look for synergies, trying to collaborate to each other, trying to build up capacity, just combining our different strengths. And the idea is that, but a mutual reinforcement and cooperation, we could really even much better, we can reach much better objectives, and maybe we can really make a deeper impact in this area. So as different working groups, we are trying to organize in ourselves, which is initially was not easy because, the different working groups have to address very practical needs in terms of the activity of the ERNs. We had to discuss on the IT platforms. We had to discuss on ethics. We had to discuss on the health, on the informed consent for patients. But research was at least more, at the very beginning, it was a bit more heterogeneous and maybe not easy to start just focusing as a group of very different ERNs, but also with common goals. And during these months, I think that we are just reaching this objective of trying to organize and work together as a group. So for this, we are trying to have different tools, like we are obviously communicating to each other very frequently. We have regular WebEx conferences, and for this, we are just receiving very important help from the DG Santé, and Helen Bourne is going to be the person just helping us in this effort. And then obviously we have to take advantage of the tools that the European Union is providing us to exchange documents, to be able to communicate to each other. And our first goal for the first months of activity of our working group was to try to start building up capacity. So we are in the process of trying to map all the different research resources that we pull together among the different ERNs, trying to identify research interests, priorities, capacities, and resources. We obviously keep a very close eye on the research opportunities, and we heard from ILO what will be the opportunities from the Horizon 2020 and other calls, because obviously one of the major difficulties that we find is that as ERNs, we don't have research or money for funds for research. Only we receive funds for organization of the ERN and all the support that we have from ERN, from the European Commission. But obviously, when we try to develop some research activities, we need to try to be to apply or to keep an eye on different opportunities that the European Union could provide, and obviously in the future, maybe some other opportunities coming from other stakeholders. So we need to interact with all the stakeholders, as I said, and today is an excellent example of how we are starting to try to position ourselves in a situation in which we could just also interact with other and detect other possibilities and capabilities. The activities that we have developed so far, we started formally the 12th of October 2017 with a face-to-face meeting in Brussels, just during one of the ERN coordinators group meeting. And we, at that time, as you will hear later on, the European Joint Programme of Rare Diseases was being prepared. So we have a very active and very deep interaction with the promoters of this initiative, and most ERNs were involved in this, and hopefully in future opportunities we will do the same effort. And then I must say that Luca Sangiorgi deserves all the profit for the organization from the research working group of this workshop today, together with RD Action and EMA. And this is another example of how we are just trying to develop different efforts in different directions. So now we, as Helen said, we are trying to be more trying to keep the very focused and organized activities for the future. And I hope that in the next months we will be able to address even more activities and opportunities. And with time, the working group will be a very excellent engine just to help the different all the ERNs just to achieve their goals. So I think that this is all. I don't know if you have any. Next speaker will come.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. I think we'll come back to you for some questions as well. Just before we go to Eileen, maybe you want to make your way up, and I'll just very briefly present this slide, which is inserted into this presentation, so it's almost a 4-in-1. You've heard this already this morning, but just to point out that alongside the research working group, which is organized by the coordinators, there's also a working group on ethics and data protection and legal, and Maurizio also gave you a nice outline to this. I think it's just something to bear in mind. So this is the working group which is chaired by Nicoline Hugelbrugge from Genturis Network, and they are developing a statement, may have already developed a statement on managing conflicts of interest, because of course the engagement or lack thereof of companies, of industry, with the networks, it's a very hot topic. It's a very important topic. We'll discuss in more detail tomorrow as well. But perhaps, you know, in our questions, we can just ascertain what is the status of this very important document. And the second thing I also just wanted to raise attention to, we had this also in Professor Scarpa's excellent presentation, is that we had a workshop organized under the Eurodas Roundtable of Companies enterprise, which many of you are aware of. This was last autumn, and this was really the companies coming together to start to come up with a kind of a wish list of how they would like ideally to engage with ERNs and what sorts of points of collaboration they could identify. So this is also, it's another part of the background, another piece of the puzzle that we have there alongside all of these activities. So we will move now to Eileen's presentation. So Eileen Treacy, it's a delight to have you here with us. So we're fortunate to have two representatives in the room from the ERN Board of Member States. We have Eileen, who's representing Ireland, and we also have Monica Pruce representing the UK. So Eileen is going to talk to us a little bit about the Board of Member States activity of particular relevance to this topic. Thank you, Eileen.
Good morning, and thank you, Vicky, for that very nice introduction. So, as Vicky stated, I am the Irish Member State representative on the ERN Board of Member States. My own particular background is as a clinical biochemical geneticist, but I've been asked today to briefly introduce the background to the board position statement on ERNs and industry, representing the board as the chairperson of the board, Professor Helena Karinin, cannot be here today. So you'll probably know, you'll see on this slide, that the ERN Board of Member States was established on the recommendation in 2014 of the Commission delegated decision that the ERNs should be governed by a board of the network composed of representatives from each member state. This board should be in charge of producing and adopting the rules of procedure, the work plans and progress reports, and any other documents related to the activities of the network. And I won't go through this again because we've heard extensively this morning that clinical research will have a central role in the operation of the ERNs. As recommended by the outset of the planning for the ERNs from the Eurodas and the European Patients Forum, the care provided through these ERNs should be patient-centred. And we know that the patient priorities emphasised to date include the development of best practice guidelines, clinical research, registries, clinical trials, and social care pathways. And again, as we heard about ERDEC and the goals for the next 10 years, consistent with these goals, it is clear that these European reference networks will have a pivotal role in developing new therapies for patients in the coming years with the necessary and vital collaboration and partnerships with industry and academic partners. It is proposed, however, from the board that such partnerships should be regulated to identify and avoid, if at all possible, conflicts of interest, to preserve the interests and welfare of patients and the scientific integrity of the network researchers and care providers. So you probably all understand what a conflict of interest in this regard is, and it can be defined as a set of circumstances that create a professional judgment or actions regarding a primary interest. That would be promoting and protecting the integrity of research, the welfare of patients, and the quality of medical education that could be unduly influenced by a secondary interest. So we commonly think of the secondary interest as being financial, but just to point out that this could also be an academic conflict of interest. And this is outlined as in one of the operational criteria for the networks. You see here that in the network's assessment, that each network should adhere to ethical criteria, should be transparent, and avoid any conflict of interest. And it is noted specifically in this criterion that this relates to developing and implementing clinical guidelines, patient pathways, and other clinical decision-making tools. So in early 2016, the Board of Member States was asked to consider a brief guidance for ERN applicants relating to conflict of interest, and a working group of the board was established. And with the assistance from the Commission, a FAQ response was written in April 2016, followed by the guidance statement, which you see here, which was published in 2016 in November. And you can see at the top of the slide, you'll get the slides later, the link where this guidance statement can be seen. So to summarize this very quickly, the Board of Member States recognizes the importance and necessity for engagement between ERN members and industry where appropriate, for example, in clinical trials and research projects. However, there is no legal provision currently for the involvement of external stakeholders, including industry, in the operation and governance of the ERNs. A few points from the guidance document are illustrated here. So the board considers that a complete transparency policy should apply to the relationship between ERNs and industry. It was also suggested that each designated ERN should define its own conflict of interest policy and ensure disclosure of all financial and non-financial conflicts of interest before any engagement commences. It became very apparent in the working group that there are differences between approaches to policies for conflict of interest between the member states. Therefore, as you can see here, it was suggested that the conflict of interest policies for networks and healthcare providers must all respect their own national and European legislation. We've heard just now from Vicky about the ERN coordinators, ethics and legal working group, and they have developed a draft working paper of conflict of interest, which we understand will be used for all ERNs collectively. And we're happy to say that it appears from the preliminary draft that we've seen of this statement that this working paper aligns well with the board's statement. Just to finalize, I just want to emphasize that my colleagues on the board have asked me to emphasize that the importance for each ERN, however, to be well acquainted with this statement when this statement is finalized and agreed. And we consider that if there is not serious intent to avoid conflicts of interest in the ERNs, that this could be harmful indeed to the reputation of the ERNs, and with potential loss of trust between the healthcare providers and the ERNs and the patients, and this could lead to patients and healthcare providers not trusting or implementing the clinical practice guidelines produced by the ERNs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eileen. And again, I'm sure we'll have some questions on these presentations. We have 10 minutes after our next presentation, which is Luca and I will present the survey. And then before lunch, we also have about 20 to 30 minutes for further discussion. So please keep your questions handy. So our final speaker for this snapshot presentation, it's my pleasure to introduce Daria Julkowska. Daria is familiar to many of you from many years of coordinating the various versions of ERA, that's the ERANET for rare diseases, and this was highlighted in ERO's presentation. Daria has also coordinated a recent proposal for the European Joint Programme Cofund on Rare Diseases. And I think the role of ERNs in this EJP, we'll go back to the acronyms now, again, is a very hot topic. It's something people are very interested in. So we asked Daria to give a lightning fast 5-minute presentation on the EJP specifically with ERN involvement, which is no easy feat. So I shall hand over to Daria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria, and thank you very much for inviting me here to present this very short snapshot of the 2 years of preparation of this proposal. So the European Joint Programme on Rare Diseases, it's, as mentioned this morning by Eero, it's a proposal that was submitted to the European Commission in April of this year. It's a program where we expect the contribution of the European Commission of about 55 million euros. And as you have seen, it's a co-funded project, which means that the member states, of course, also contribute to this. Will contribute to this program. So for the moment, the total budget that is being expected will be probably above 100 million euros. The project gathered 85 partners from 33 different countries, including also associated members and third countries, because Canada is also part of this program. And obviously, and most importantly, for what we discuss here, all 24 ERNs are also included and partners of this future program, participating through, for the majority of them, through their coordinating institutions, so university hospitals or hospitals. So the EJP will be organized in 4 pillars, and this is just to show you actually the involvement, the direct involvement of the ERNs in different activities that are planned in this program. So as you can see here, obviously the ERNs will be involved in the activities, in the transversal activities of the coordination, management, and all transversal activities of this program through the direct involvement of the ERN coordinator, but also different coordinators of the working groups that you have seen today. And then we have 4 pillars. You can see here that, well, I don't know if you can see it very well, but I put the red squares and green squares around the work packages where the involvement of the ERNs is direct. And as you can see here, the only pillar in which the ERNs are not directly involved is the one which is focusing on funding. And this is because of the fact that here we are talking about open funding competition. So this is where actually the funding agencies are being involved. And so to avoid the conflict of interest, we don't have direct involvement of the European reference networks in this specific pillar. But for the pillar 2, which is the virtual platform of access to data and resources, actually we have the ERNs will be the driving force for this one, because we need them to guide the development of this specific platform, but also the verification of the tools that will be produced or created by this specific pillar. And also this pillar is being chaired by one of the ERN's coordinators, by Franz Schäfer. The pillar 3, which is about empowerment and training. Again, here we have a lot of involvement of the ERNs through into different activities of training, and more specifically, there is also a dedicated work package, which is the one that is dedicated to the training, specific training for the ERNs that will be developed by the ERNs themselves. And then we have the pillar 4, which is focusing on the acceleration of translation of research results, but also on acceleration of clinical trials. And this is actually also one of the pillars where the ERNs are the driving force. So I'm going to only zoom on this specific one, the pillar 4 and the work package 20, which is really in which the ERNs are very much involved, and which is focusing on this acceleration of the validation, use, and development of innovative methodologies tailored for clinical trials in rare disease research. And this one can be organized, or we call it, around 4 Ds: dissemination, demonstration, design, and development. And it can be stratified. So first of all, 7 of the ERNs are directly involved from the T0 of the specific work package, but also there will be a task force group that will be actually driving the whole work package, and where the ERNs will be very much involved, either directly in the task force groups or ad hoc whenever the expertise will be necessary, because this work package has 3 main objectives. The first one is to support the design and planning of RD clinical studies, and this is in collaboration with the European infrastructure ECRIN. So the idea here is that with the help of ECRIN that is dedicated to the, of course, to the clinical trials, to the support of the methodologies in clinical trials, the idea is that since this infrastructure is not rare disease specific, obviously there is a need to very strong collaboration between ECRIN and the European reference networks to drive the support for clinical trials that will be adapted to the needs of rare diseases and to the needs of clinical and to the needs of the European reference networks. And then we have 2 other goals. The one which is focusing on the demonstration projects on existing statistical methodologies to improve rare disease trials. And this is again based on the already existing knowledge on the methodologies of the projects like IDEAL, for example. And the idea here is again that we will open, or there will be open specific projects in which only European reference networks are going to participate. So they will be the drivers for this. They will be the ones who are going to create those projects. They will be the ones that are going to disseminate the knowledge and that are going to help in the implementation of the results of those projects within the networks. And finally, the third one, which is the one focusing on the innovative methodologies, so the ones that do not yet exist, and where again the European reference networks will be the drivers for the creation, for the proposition, and for running of those specific projects on those innovative methodologies for clinical trials. And that is where I'm going to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daria. There are certainly questions, so keep them warm for after the next presentation. It's now my honor to present Luca Sangiorgi, who is a coordinator of the ERN BOND, but also for this workshop, the liaison officer with EMA. So Luca, you will present now the results of a survey done towards all ERNs to understand what are the needs and expectations in terms of research. Thank you very much. Looking forward to listen to the results.
Thank you for the nice introduction. First of all, I need to acknowledge that this workshop has really been done in a very strong collaboration with RD Action, that I really need to thank for the amount of activity and work that has put in it. EMA, that has really strongly contributed. We had a couple of meetings in order to prepare this workshop. And the DGs, meaning both DG Sante and DG Research. To my knowledge, this is the first attempt to have a sort of a comprehensive point of view on what is the status of research within the ERN, because many, I would say most of the ERN have already done a certain exercise within their ERN in order to collect this kind of information, but this is the first global vision on the ERN world of what is happening on the research side, and I think that's already a very nice result. We have decided to have a sort of a short presentation, meaning that due to the fact that Vicky has really strongly contributed in this activity, so Vicky will start and I will continue.
Thank you very much, Luca. Yeah, we've decided to do a duet because actually we got quite a lot of information back from this survey. So the survey, if you're not sure what we're talking about, for each of these workshops that we do, it would be wonderful to have all 24 networks talking in detail about their plans and their activities. But as you can imagine, this is not possible. We'd be here for a long, long time. So we always try to highlight or ask for volunteers to do some more detailed case studies. So we'll have these next. But we also want to give a voice to all the other networks who are not able to present. And actually, what we find is with these surveys, we get some really good data back. So for this one, we received so far, we had 21 responses from 18 networks. Sometimes a couple of the networks reply with different perspectives. Maybe the coordinator will answer, and then perhaps the chair of research or something like this. We also give people an option as to how they respond, because as Luca said, surveying the ERN and making sure that you speak with the voice of the ERN can be quite challenging. So we ask people if they want to speak as a coordinator, or whether they can justifiably say, I feel that I can represent my network. But if you haven't got the time to do that, the chance to do that, we still want to get a bit of data. So people are quite welcome to respond in more of a personal capacity representing their healthcare provider. For this one, we had 17 representing the ERN and 4 who preferred to reply in a more personal capacity. So the survey is just a web-based survey. And we had a mixture of free text questions and multiple choice questions. So what we asked them first of all is, what is the structure? Do you have any organization in your network to address research? And unsurprisingly, actually, almost all of the respondents said, yes, indeed, they have a dedicated, either a working group or a work package or a transversal research committee. Sometimes these are specifically for clinical research. Sometimes they're more cross-cutting. I won't read all the comments, but there are some really interesting comments that come out every time we do these surveys. So, for example, one of our respondents replied that they have a working group. It's not fully committed to actually submitting grants together as a single cohesive group, but some collaborations have been formed already. I think one thing we'd like to explore over the rest of today and tomorrow is how far we actually, and this comes back to the concept of what is a piece of ERN-led research. How do you actually involve all members of your group? Do you need to do that every time you're involved in a trial or a study? A particular comment I wanted to highlight is that the ERN, so one commentator replied that they have 8 main thematic groups, and so as you saw from Maurizio's presentation, the networks are very, very broad, but they subdivide into more distinct clinical domains. So for each of these, what's really interesting is that you have members who have a responsibility to address research, and then those people all come together and have regular communications. I think it's really important as well that you have representatives coming from both adult and pediatric backgrounds altogether, because this is a major added value, I think, actually, of the ERNs, is that we don't have adult networks versus pediatric. They are almost all supposed to be to bridge that gap. So second question, this was interesting. We asked people to respond and to say, what do you really think is going to be the added value? What's the point of this? What are you going to do better as the ERN than what you did in your smaller communities before the ERN? So again, just a few highlights. Many participants highlighted the fact that the ERN, of course, will be able to collect larger numbers of patients, build larger cohorts, and develop the critical mass that we know that we need. Many in this capacity mentioned registries specifically. They mentioned the obvious benefits of having a larger population of well-stratified patient cohorts. Alongside registries, other types of European-level databases promoting biomarkers and genetic studies. This was highlighted as another key added value. Again, building this critical mass, others specifically commented that this gives a sort of a collegiality, which is a term I like, around how you determine, for example, outcomes and select endpoints for specific diseases. The ERN may have a bigger coverage of the European territory, and because the best experts are represented, it works as a kind of collective think tank. Many people actually cited this new added value of just working together, in fact, of collaborating. And that's something that I think is really interesting, because when years ago we tried to come up with a way to group diseases into rare renal, rare bone, etc., we really wondered, would there actually be a lot of added value at collaborating at that level? It's important so you don't leave patients and diseases out, but actually, can you practically learn from each other? And the comments that we got here say very much that yes, you can. So this is very good. Several people highlighted the fact that their ERN structure, they think, will encourage active patient participation to research and also better participation of patient organizations to clinical trial decision-making processes. And I like this last comment. There's tremendous opportunity for cross-fertilization of ideas and for creation of new transdisciplinary networks. The last slide I will present before we move to Luca's section of the analysis is we wanted to know, has your ERN, in the very brief time it's been up and running, so the networks are just over a year old, Have they already formed any plans? Have they actually done anything yet to really start advancing clinical research? Unsurprisingly, many networks are concerned, very wisely actually, with doing a survey. And you think, well, okay, everything starts with surveys, but this is so important for the ERNs because people haven't come together at those broad levels. They haven't come together at the broad rare neurological or rare metabolic. So you might know and you will know what's happening in your specific subset of those conditions, but you probably didn't know what was going on across the board. So lots of the networks are doing very in-depth surveys, and we'll hear more about one of these in the case studies, to collect what clinical trials their member healthcare providers are involved in, what projects are ongoing, what are the gaps, very, very important. One of the respondents highlighted that actually establishing clinical trial networks is one of our priorities. A couple cited being part of specific research projects. This is something that they rightly see as an achievement so far, so SOLVE-RD and also the EJP proposal preparation. Setting up of multiple disease-specific registries with different thematic areas is the first step to move towards future clinical research projects. I'm sure we'll hear over the next 2 days more about how some of the networks are starting to build or are struggling to build registries, depending on their situation. I'll fast forward a little bit here. Interesting last one, plans to enlarge national studies into European studies. Some of the challenges which we'll come back to later, a lot of people mentioned the difficulty in actually doing these cross-border multinational trials. So plans are being made for some of the networks, but they're still in very early stages. So I'm going to hand over to Luca, who's going to take us through some more of the multiple choice questions and then some further free text. Thanks, Luca.
Okay, so let's consider we went back. Sorry.
Keeping you in suspense here.
Okay. Finally, I made it. As you can see, now we are going to the multiple choice part of the questionnaire. And this multiple choice part, well, I mean, let me give a brief introduction. It's pretty clear that ERNs are coming from completely different backgrounds. There are ERNs that are coming from a very well-settled research group, meaning that most of them were consortia that have already participated to calls, and there are other ERNs that are newborn in reality or merging of different groups. So what we really wanted to get from this questionnaire is clearly an outline of what are the different priorities of each ERN, because, you know, coming from a research context, going to a very much cure-oriented context, there might be difficulties in many ways in dealing with the research. And it's pretty clear that most of the ERN are going toward something that is really close to treatment of patient. Because as you can see, the most quoted answer are, okay, therapeutic option medicine, quality of life. That's a very interesting story, meaning that in some ERN, we are working on patient-derived outcome that are really close to the quality of life aspect. But please, take a look also to some of, one of the most quoted reply was epidemiology. That's part of the discussion that we had previously on data. And it's difficult to get good data if you really don't know even the epidemiology, incidence and prevalence of some disease. And sometimes this is the case, to be honest. But another very much quoted aspect is the translational research. Then, you need to translate translational, meaning what you really mean with translation, because it's really a wide term. But it's really interesting that we are very, I mean, all the ERN are really close, are really keen to go for application. Then we went to, how do you think you want to work on that? That's fantastic. What are going to be the priorities in your vision of the ERN? And again, this is quite interesting because it's pretty much confirmed that we are going toward something that is very application. But there are other aspects that are coming up that seems to be quite interesting, like public health. And this gives you the idea, a clear idea on, are we able to measure the impact of the ERNs on the reality of patient life? That's an open question that I think is going to be really important to be answered at the end of the first 5 years of the ERN experience. As technology assessment, are the ERNs, and I mean, according to the place where we are hosted, that could be a good topic for future discussion, how ERN can play a role in the technology assessment European scenario. And again, how do we measure the impact at the socio-economical level of the ERN? Are the ERN changing really the scenario or not? These are quite interesting topics, and not to think about basic and clinical research. That's another very interesting topic, because in a way, if you want to set up the good treatment for the future, if you are not connected with the basic and preclinical research, that is never going to work. So what is going to be the connection back and forward between ERN and those people that are running exclusively basic or preclinical research? This is, again, a very interesting topic. And then, what are the tools that we need in order to properly run this kind of research? And it's really interesting that most of the people are going more or less in the same direction. Set up a sort of a, I don't know, unit or a clinical trial center within the ERN. It's really relevant, the ELSI support, but it's really interesting the fact that most of the people that answered the question were also asking for a centralized grant office in order to participate as ERN to grants. And in a way, that's really important also to mention the aspect of training and education that is relevant for all these aspects. But still, I mean, I would say that the answers were very much focalized in many ways. What is the status? Do we have tools to do this? The answer were really interesting. In a way, it's funny because some of them were saying, well, maybe, but we need to get a better idea. And that tells you that ERNs are still a work in progress. Again, as I was mentioning before, there are ERNs that are coming from a very well-established research network, and probably they are mutuating this kind of situation by the previous experiences. Registries seems to be the main topic, and we go back to the aspect of the data. There are ERNs that have the possibility to set up their own registry. There are existing registries. How do we work with all this amount of data? Probably it's going to be important also for AGPs to think about this. And this is good thinking way. Another very important aspect is research database. Where do we collect all the information on what is already ongoing on research? How can we join for that? And that's another stimulating aspect for AGPs. ERN grants. Most of the people are already thinking, how do we survive? That's a good point. Because European Commission is always telling us that ERN are an infrastructure and not a project. We're wondering. Sorry. We were wondering, how do we get the money to do that? And most of the people are, okay, going for the European Commission, but they are thinking that, again, National Research Council are important, and this brings us back to the how it's necessary that ERNs should be embedded in the national context, not only at the, I would say, cure level. It's interesting the fact that we are mentioning charities and private foundations that are players that are becoming more and more relevant. We got an example in our ERN, but very important is industries and how do we deal with industry and to have an opportunity to have a clear approach by ERN to the industry. And that's something that has been debated before also, and that we have been debated at the coordinator level and should be debated also at the board of member state level. But this is a very strong message from ERN. And for the industry interaction, we were taking a devoted slide for that. Industry interaction, there were many interesting examples of good interaction. It's really important that the aspect of the registry that I was mentioning before, please consider that industry is really willing to support the registry, but then it's going to become a problem for the ownership of the data, and that's something that needs to be discussed pretty clearly and pretty openly. But then ERN are great opportunity, meaning that they can provide to industry fantastic cohort of patients, homogeneous cohort of patients that could be really interesting for industries. I mean, these are more or less the aspect, and we know that there are ERNs that are more advanced in that. They are showing me 2 minutes more, and I have a lot of slides. Meaning, but you can imagine, we have an enormous amount, we have collected really an enormous amount of data. Regulatory interaction, it's funny that EMA is not at the top. And this, this shows the needs of this workshop, because we think that we need to encourage and to further develop the interaction between ERN and EMA. And what are the obstacles? Guess, lack of funds, 19 out of 19. So meaning that it's really clear that it's really important to have a good sustainability, but there are other very interesting topics like well-stratified patient cohort. That's really interesting for ERN. Lack of regulatory know-how. Interesting for the place where we are. The following one, uncertainty how ERN can lead a clinical trial, can lead a research. So we are still missing this aspect that is really absolutely substantial. And what are the other aspects that should be mentioned, and what are the other aspects that should be taken in consideration? Again, yes, ERN are care, but research is important. It's really important that, as Vicky was mentioning at the beginning, collaboration could be a good topic for this aspect, meaning that we can bring something more interesting through the collaboration set by ERN, facilitating this kind of interaction, especially not only within Europe, but also for those consortia that are outside Europe. Think about ERDIC, for instance, but think about, I mean, other, I don't know, North America consortia that are willing to collaborate with us and that have already requested to do this, but we don't have clear rules on how to do that, to be very honest. So I think that, and this is just, I would say, half of the information that we have collected through this very important and rich questionnaire. We consider this a very good food for the discussion tomorrow. We can try to find out a way to distribute some of these slides in order to help also the end to. But I think that this is going to be really a very interesting topic for the future. And well, tomorrow I will. This indicates the clear need of keep on going in this kind of activities also for the future. Thank you very much for your attention. And sorry for the time.
Thank you very much, Luca and Vicky, for this duet. Indeed, very first insight into collective needs of ERNs. We'll have now 5 to 10 minutes for questions and discussion, but of course, as you can guess, the discussion will be continued tomorrow and for the next weeks and months and years, probably. Do we have immediate, urgent questions? Daria?
Yes, so I have one question and one comment. Maybe I will start with a comment regarding the collaboration, collaboration outside of the European reference networks. So this is something that has been also on the agenda actually of ERDOC, and there is a task force which is in preparation. It is a task force that is three or managed by 3 different committees of ERDOC, the interdisciplinary therapeutics and funders. And Maurizio and Virginie are also involved in this committee, so they know that this is on the table, and there is also a lot of interest from other, let's say, continents like Australia, US, and Japan to start this collaboration. So we hope that we will push it quickly, and we are going to go into the discussions on how this collaboration can be done. And my question, and the question that I have is about when you were talking about the different possible resources for funding or the future for the European reference networks. I was wondering if there is anything in plans of also of the European Commission, but also of the European reference networks, to create or to discuss, especially in the context of the next framework program, how the structure of funds could be part of this possible funding, especially that this is something that is very much relevant to regional and national resources. So this could be really a very good link between to anchor the ERNs into the ecosystem, national ecosystem. So that's the question.
Thank you, Daria. Well, we might have 2 parts of the answer. One side on the ERN, and maybe I will hand over to my colleague from DG Research, because I know that thoughts have been ongoing, but what can be said for the moment, I'm not sure. So, Io, maybe you want to say something, and then I pass the word to Luca for the next research programs after Horizon 2020.
Yes, so the European Commission is working on the proposal for the next research and innovation framework program, which will be called Horizon Europe. So this proposal will be presented in the beginning of June. So currently there is no more information about it.
On the side of ERNs?
Okay. After this, it's difficult to say anything, but still, I think that this is going to be part of the activity of the research working group of ERN, meaning that it's clear that after this mapping, we should keep on going on defining what are our priorities and what are the topics that should be really taken in consideration for to transmit to the different DGs, Santé, research, whatever. I connect, why not? Because they might have many interesting aspects to be taken in consideration, especially on the big data approach that we could be tested in ERN, just to throw something into the middle of the discussion. But still, I mean, it's really part of the ones that we have seen that we have similar approaches, or there's hot topics that are really clear for most of the ERN. We should focus on this ERN in order to develop a sort of a common approach and then bring this kind of request or suggestion or proposal, call it in the best way you want to call them, to the attention of the different. A very important topic that should be taken in consideration is that we should do that in clear collaboration with, as all the ERN should be in close collaboration with patient association, but at the same time we should involve other players in this kind of discussion. It would be interesting to open this kind of discussion also to other players in order to see how they can support us in the different, or if they are willing to support us, or if they are willing to play any kind of role. That is going to take a certain amount of discussion also with DG Santé, I guess. But still, I mean, it's going to be interesting.
And to conclude on this question, I would like to say that we, as DG Santé, for us it's very important that ERNs work collectively. That's why we are asking the coordinators group, and in particular its working group research, to come, as Luca was saying, to a coordinated common approach. The needs are different, the state of play is different in every ERN, and that's why we need to have synergies and work together. Any other urgent question?
Josie Drebwell, ERN Rita. I was wondering if it, or how easy it would be if a clinical trial now is lodged at the clinical trial registry, if it is possible to say whether they're involved already with an ERN or not, whether there could be an extra line. I was wondering if that is possible, or is that involving a whole lot of procedures?
The answer is probably more for this afternoon discussion after clinical trials presentation, or unless somebody here would like to provide an immediate answer. No, I don't. So sorry, but we'll be back to your question and to your point later this afternoon.
May I just ask one quick question, actually, to Eduardo? So you, and also to Eero. So you, of course, we know that the new Horizon Europe priorities, the calls, the details will not be out for some time. But I think, can I just clarify that you said, Eduardo, that within the research working group, you've already fed some sort of priorities or some sort of a wish list from the coordinators to that process, or that hasn't happened yet?
No, that hasn't happened yet. This is in our minds, just to tackle as soon as possible.
But you are getting prepared, which is already a good sign.
I was just going to say perhaps one thing that we could do, because I mean this survey has already gathered quite a lot of information, but we still have a few networks who were not able to complete. And actually I think sometimes when the networks see what other people have responded, sometimes people interpret questions in a slightly different way. So what we could do, or the working group could do, if it's useful, is you could sort of reopen that, maybe revise some of the questions ever so slightly, and actually give people a bit longer, because I'm aware as well that we tend, because we work so fast, we're also incredibly busy in the ERN sphere. People only have a few weeks to maybe do this. So in fact, if you do a broader reopening, then perhaps you could get more concrete data that you can then really use in your discussions with these other bodies, other DGs.
But it would be important to keep it unbiased like it has been now.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, one of the very interesting aspects of this questionnaire is that it was completely unbiased, meaning that people do not know what are the final results of the questionnaire. So it's really important that we got unanimous answer on certain topic without sort of driving this topic.
Thank you very much. And now I think we will move to the case studies, so to 4 specific networks, starting now with MetabERN on metabolic disorders. And it will not be presented by the usual representative Maurizio Scarpa, but by Jean-Michel Heard. Thank you very much. Word pass to you.
Thank you. So we are pleased to share with you the information about the results of the survey we've made, to know about the priorities, the research priorities, and the research interest into the center that participate to the ERN. So we So we send the questionnaire to the 69 centers that participate to MetabERN, and each of them received 3 questionnaires. One was sent to the university representative, one to the clinical department representative, and one to a researcher in one of the laboratory working at the center. Altogether, the 3 surveys contain 126 questions, and they try to get information about the level of research activities, the priorities, the estimated quality and impact of research, the motivation and barrier to do research, the facilities that are available, and the infrastructure. So I will show you the results of this, not of all the questions, because we are close to big data there. 126 questions in 3 surveys and 69 centers. So that was quite a big deal to analyze. But you will see that the results give quite a mirror picture of what we have heard a minute ago about the survey made at the ERN level and not the center level. So we got good responses. 67 out of the 69 centers send at least 1 and most often 2 or 3 response to the questionnaire. And so at the end, we have to analyze 148 responses. And each of the questionnaire contained between 30 to 60 questions, and the ratio of completion was close to 70% for each of the answers. So I give you a very integrated view of that, what we got. The first aspect is about the level of research activity. So the conclusion is that it's high. Almost everyone is doing research, and everyone is publishing in a journal that is referenced in IZI. Most of the time, it's the people who are doing research have worked before in a foreign country. So they are really a researcher in the full sense of this word. The research and teaching activity was felt as a main contribution for the institution, quality and respectability and visibilities. They contribute to international and national research. The people doing research have estimate that it improves the visibility, the quality of teachings, and they reach high standard with respect to different criteria. I will not go through that. But they have a very positive feeling about the quality of what they do, and they have a demonstration in terms of publication that that's real. In terms of the teaching, the institution award doctorates, most large proportion of them, and they are often taught in English, and the PhD program insists on interdisciplinary aspect, the mobility of researchers, the exchange with other universities. So they are really at the international level of competition. an interesting point is about who has the responsibility of doing research in the institution. And the interesting aspect is that only physicians are absent in the personnel that are responsible. So it means that the physicians are a very central person for performing research in their centers. That's not surprising for professors or PhDs, but it's the important aspect is that physicians are even more involved than the university person. So what about the type of research they perform? So I will show you the data from 122 responses that have been analyzed, and the answer will be shown in this radar diagram with the number indicating the absolute number of response, which say that we have a high or rather high activity in that field. So what type of research? You see that the most active research that is done is about genetic and pathophysiology, then about, let's say, clinical instead of therapeutic research. That would be better. There is also high activity in epidemiology and much less in terms of preclinical aspect or HAT or research on health system, or even less in human and social science. So we'll look at each of these aspects more in detail. About genetic and pathophysiology, the main activity is to identify genes that are involved in the disease, doing genomic sequencing, but much less about everything, any activity linked to more basic research. They do little animal model study. They are not very much involved in new technology, etc. About epidemiology, epidemiology is active, and that's consistent with what we've heard before. And it's essentially focused on registries and on the cohort, on the management of data, assessment of biomarkers. Everything is quite interesting for the research performed in the center in epidemiology. Public health is much less active. And the only two aspects that are really prevalent are doing population screening advices, testing population, editing guidelines, participating to national plans, but very less about e-health activities, about cost analysis and or HAT. Human and social science, that's very small. And the most surprising results was about the little activity of research dedicated to the analysis of the quality of life. Same is true for social perception of rare disease, which is absolutely crucial. Preclinical research, not very active either. Toxicology is almost absent. Biotechnical research is almost not there. Research infrastructure, what do they use? They essentially use registries, long-term cohorts, and genomic and proteomic analysis platform. Not so much bioinformatics, as you can, I was expecting more than that. Clinical research, the most focus is on investigational trials, phase 1 and phase 2 trials, a little bit less about trials, clinical trials performed in partnership with pharma companies, and less about surgical process and drug development, almost nothing about bioproduction. So if we try to summarize that, and again, that's not all the data we have, but just a small glimpse. There are strengths that are obvious, which is a high motivation and high commitment to do research in every center. There are facilities and conditions to do research which are considered as good. The activity in research is high, including for the healthcare providers who are in charge of giving care. It's a competitive research. It has a positive impact on teaching and on the links with industry. And the most competitive fields are genetic pathophysiology, epidemiology, and some aspect of public health. There are weaknesses, and the main barrier that are perceived to do research by the participant is the lack of time. And this comes before the lack of money. They really need to have more time because they spend most of their time on clinical workload. The weakest fields are preclinical research, research in technology, but it can be, these are not very central field for clinical research, for clinical activities, and it can be done in collaboration with other centers. I think it's much more concerning that e-health is not very active, especially in the perspective of the cross-border health system that we wish to build up. And there is, for my view, something which is really a threat. The weakest field is social science. No one is really interested in analyzing how the population perceives rare disease, how we can improve the perception, how we can improve the quality of life of patients. There is a lot of work to be done in that field, and it's interesting that this was one of the priority retained by the ERN, which suggests that they are already aware of their weaknesses and want to correct them. But I think this is really crucial, especially with regard to the involvement and the real active participation of patients in the work of the ERN. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will move to the next case study directly, which is about the ERN EURO-NMD on neuromuscular diseases, and it will be presented by Teresinha Evangelista. The word is yours. Thank you in advance.
I'm going to focus mainly on clinical research, as this was what was asked from our ERN, and just to let you know what I'm talking, well, which ERN I'm talking about. It's about rare neuromuscular diseases, and we have, as the other ERNs, quite 5 subgroups of different entities of different specialties inside the neuromuscular disorders. We are almost as large as Mauritius ERN. We have 61 HCPs in 14 countries. But this is just to give a little bit of overview of our ERN. We did a strategic research plan, and this strategic research plan had as main goals to promote research activities within the network, to ensure an harmonized baseline that would enable standardization and reuse of the network data and samples for research. And also we wanted to develop better research services. We have a working group in our ERN that is devoted to research, and they are trying to achieve these goals. Our key deliverables for the first year were, as for most of the ERNs, to do a mapping of the research infrastructures and studies for neuromuscular disease patients. One of our objectives was to agree in consent elements, but this became a secondary objective because we have a consent form offered by the Commission for the CPMS, and each research study will need its proper consent form. We also are working on having mechanisms to share data amongst the different HCPs, research data, not clinical data. And the samples from our patients and the clinical information are going to be submitted to general databases and to RD Connect. But our ERN started not from the air, and we have a previous work with another network, which was called TRANSPLANT-CHILD. This was born from a research EU-funded project and is now self-sustained, and it's a global alliance, no longer a European alliance, but almost all the partners in our ERN, or all the partners in our ERN, are also members of TRANSPLANT-CHILD. So TRANSPLANT-CHILD has developed over the years a lot of resources that are also available to EURO-NMD. It's quite hard to see the slides. Some of those resources are the patient registries that are associated with TRANSPLANT-CHILD. We have what we call the care and trial site. We have a very useful tool which is called TACT, and I'll go further. I will explain a little bit more about this. We have a lot of training and education tools through TRANSPLANT-CHILD. And as for the registries, these are quite useful for the clinical trials and for clinical research. As you all know, registries are developed to help researchers to answer questions such how common some individual diseases are, which are the support activities that we can do to improve patients' care. Registries can also help pharmaceutical companies interested in locating patients for clinical trials, and registries facilitate our contact with patients. Patients are informed through their own national registries of upcoming trials. There are newsletters, a lot of ways of contacting the patients without the industry being in the middle of this contact. These are some of the examples of our registries, some of the diseases that have registries, either national or global registries. And at the same time, TRANSPLANT-CHILD at a certain point decided to create a registries toolkit to help different countries to develop their own registries in a with a similar methodology. The care and trial site registry is also another of the facilities of TRANSPLANT-CHILD that we have incorporated in our ERN. So the CTSR was one of our specific criteria for the ERN was that our centers had to register into the care and trial site registry, into the CTSR, and this was why, because one of the hurdles with trials for rare diseases is to identify trial sites, sites that are able to recruit enough patients, that offer specific standards of care, and that offer experience in clinical trials. So the concept behind the CTSR was to collect all this information, like which kind of personnel the centers have, the facilities, the patient population they see, and all this would help industry and also the clinical, academic researchers to identify potential partners. So this was one of the things we asked our HCPs was to register in the care and trial site registry. Like this, we are able to know the infrastructure of the centers, and allows us to identify gaps in patient care. And because the CTSR is a flexible database, it can be expanded with new questions that we need to add, or if we have a questionnaire that we need to pass to our 61 centers, we can do that through the CTSR. As you can see, the information collected in the CTSR is mostly general site information. which patients cohorts that center has, like number of patients, the diagnostic tools they have, if they have a clinical trial infrastructure, what are the care settings that center has, and also in what kind of research and education do they participate? If they participate in clinical trials, how many publications, and also participation in networks, because some of the centers in the CTSR not only are part of EURO-NMD, but they are also part of the rare neurological diseases, ERN. The TACT, it's the Treat-NMD Advisory Committee for Therapeutics. It's a tool that puts together a multidisciplinary international group of experts, either from academia, from industry, patients, organizations, institutional and government scientific research centers. What they do through TACT is to review and give guidance to through the translational and development path of therapeutic programs in rare neuromuscular diseases. So they review therapeutics that are either submitted by industry or by academics, and they address the issues such as drug formulation, bioavailability, toxicology, regulatory requirements, and in the end they offer they give the applicants a comprehensive written review that will allow them to either continue in the process they are with a drug, or just to go back and reassess all the work that was done previous to the application to the TACT. This is all, the report is not a public report, although a summary, let's say a lay summary that is not, that can be published, is published in the Treat-NMD website. So we have all these tools at in our hands through Treat-NMD, and there is agreement between EURO-NMD and Treat-NMD. And what can we do with these tools? How can EURO-NMD make use of this if there is such a, through Treat-NMD, there is such a huge involvement with industry? Not that industry influences the work of Treat-NMD, but they benefit from the work of Treat-NMD, and they obviously pay for inquiries, but they are not allowed to have patients' data that is not anonymized, okay? So can we expand the activities that are already done by Treat-NMD? We want to expand because the remit of diseases in EURO-NMD is bigger than in Treat-NMD. And we have, as I said, can we use this safe, ethically sound, and mutually beneficial model that was developed over many years with Treat-NMD? Can it be continued in EURO-NMD? And that's my last slide. And this is some of the research work that was done in the last 2 years through Treat-NMD.
Thank you very much for this summary of where we are with EURO-NMD on research. Now we will move to another ERN BOND, and I will not present again. Luca Sangiorgi, I will just introduce you.
This time I try to behave better with the slide. Maybe I misunderstood, but I've interpreted the way of a case study showing you a collaboration that we have already done in order to run a clinical trial. Because just to follow up, and Teresinha gave a perfect introduction, thank you, Teresinha, to what I'm going to say. I think that there might be a very good mutual interaction between ERN and companies. This is the disease that I'm talking about. I won't really bother you a lot. These are the these are determinants, but the real critical point of this disease is genetic heterogeneity. Then what happened? We set up a registry with this huge data collection, the largest registry in the world regarding this disease. That is becoming really the registry of the ERN, because most of the centers that were participating to the ERN are already collaborating in pulling together data by previous collaboration, meaning collaboration that have been set before the ERN birth. What happened? Well, we have set up this huge collection of data, and the company came asking, may we get a sort of information on, because we need this kind of information for a request to FDA. So they were completely missing the natural history information that were there in our registries. So the possibility that I'm showing you is exactly what we came out, providing them not the data of the patient, but the metadata that were needed for them to present the study. And then we gave to them all the data on how to run this kind of information. We gave them all the distribution and all the clinical manifestation of this patient. These are the only data that we gave them. And according to this data, they designed the clinical trial. So, and the clinical trial has objectives that are really interesting, meaning that we were pushing toward the fact that, as Jean-Michel was already mentioning, studies on the quality of life, limitation, and pain and interference with the life were put. Because, and this was clearly a request from our ERN, because this was of limited interest for the company, to be very honest. And this is the way in which we were able to collect a certain amount of information that otherwise would have been not collected. So that's a possibility. This is the company. I have already, I have a disclosure on that. This is the company that was clearly mentioning, and it's really a way of showing that it's possible to set up a good interaction with mutual benefits, especially for the patient. Thank you very much.
And last case study from ERN EURACAN on adult cancer, solid tumors, from Stephane Lejeune. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm very pleased here to be on behalf of EURACAN. So EURACAN is the ERN in rare solid adult tumor. EURACAN is covering 10 diseases, which are called domain. So historically, there are networks, national and international, already active before the ERN. Those networks were doing education, preparing clinical practice guidelines, but some of them already conducting research. So when talking about research, we have to ask ourselves, what is the added value of ERN? What could EURACAN bring to the field? So the first idea is, of course, to do cross-tumor research projects, because so far there are already clinical research working in their own domain. So we need to go beyond that. So we question ourselves which kind of research we could do encompassing at least 2 or 3 disease types, which has also, of course, scientific meaning. And also, so the ERN clear added value is to bring access to patients, more sites, and also more expertise. As we said earlier, the question is also the funding. Without funding, you don't have research. So we have to benefit from existing opportunity, whether it's a urban project or other type of funding. Here I list 2 ERTC projects where I conduct in collaboration with ERN. The first one is one investigating in adult and young, adolescent and young adult with high-grade glioma and non-grade 1 bone and soft tissue sarcoma. You know, those are rare cancer, but it's also a difficult population to which we don't have access usually, meaning the young adult and adolescent. The first question is to see whether the biology of young adult and adolescent differ from the adult, whether we can conduct one single trial addressing all those population. And this is a pilot to see whether we can conduct such a trial with a reasonable chance to perform the needed recruitment. So we are planning to recruit 50 glioma and 50 sarcoma. We will collect paraffin block and blood, and then we will do different molecular screening technology. The other project is quite interesting. It's a collaboration with INITA, which is a pharmaceutical company, for enrollment in INITA clinical trial. So you understood that working with industry is most of the time the only way to get access to new treatment. But industry don't have access to the network, to the site, which have access to the patient, neither to the maybe some clinical know-how. It's where ERN can play a role. So here we are going to target several rare cancer, including sarcoma, neuroendocrine tumor, ovarian cancer, exocrine pancreas. And we are going to screen for quite rare gene fusion. In fact, those gene fusion represent about 1% of those already rare cancer population. And the patient that will be detected will be invited to participate to the STAR-TRK2 clinical trial from INITA, which is testing a new drug with a molecular target. So you see here is very, I think, interesting example where ERN and pharma could collaborate, of course, through a clinical research infrastructure like ERTC. And we have other projects in discussion, including some phase 2 trial. So which lesson we have learned from the past when conducting research in a rare disease like a rare cancer? Of course, the patient, the scientific and clinical expertise are rare. So we need to go to the international scale, which is sometimes difficult because international funding is not easy to find. We need to be very strict amongst ourselves to avoid small and irrelevant study. We should not waste, meaning a rare patient. We need to use robust methodology, generating strong results. So we should avoid small study with kind of flexible design, because we have shown in the past that phase 3, for instance, is possible, even in very rare patient population. Of course, for that, you need to work maybe at the European for sure, but sometimes with North America, Australia, and other countries, which makes things complex, of course, but it's worth to generate strong evidence. The clinical site, of course, need to be of high quality with the recruitment capacity, but also the possibility to collect the sample in a good environment. That's our motto, meaning that database needs to be centralized, and the biobank as well is the only way we can ensure the quality of the material, and we can also ensure the accessibility for future research, which is, of course, important in the rare disease field. We recommend to use central laboratory because then we'll be using consistent methodology and offering optimal quality. For rare cancer, I guess it's the same in other rare disease. You need to have also central histopathological review to confirm diagnostic. And strong quality control, quality assurance, quality control should be implemented. So having that in mind, the ERTC has developed a new screening platform, taking into account all the experience we have in previous clinical trial. And we propose to EURACAN to use it as a clinical research infrastructure. So the little name is PECTA. It's a screening platform to help patients access clinical trials, especially the one who are targeting molecular aspect. So this platform enables robust molecular testing for clinical trial and translational research projects. It's one protocol which allows longitudinal collection of cancer patient data and human biological material without immediate interventional intent. So we screen patients for several diseases, including rare cancer. We screen them for the molecular profile, and when there is a clinical trial available with pharma or not with pharma, then we can do a kind of triage to direct those patients and propose them to go on board of those clinical trials. We use a broad informed consent, which allows since the beginning future unspecified use of their sample, their data, provide of course the ethical committee approval, but which doesn't request a repeat consent. And this informed consent allows also collaboration with a pharma company. And then we provide logistic biobanking and testing infrastructure. And it is flexible. Depending on the need of the project, we can work with different central laboratories providing different screening methodology. So SPECTA aims to cover any tumor type, including rare cancer. For the moment, we are targeting 100 centers for about 20 countries. And talking about rare cancer, there are 40 clinical sites coming from EURACAN. So you may know historically, many of EURACAN HPC are members of the OTC. So it's kind of overlapping, which is existing. And as I say, it's EURACAN research infrastructure. To finish, just an helicopter view of the SPECTA workflow. You can see at the clinical site, we will collect longitudinally the clinical data, so the medical history of the patient. We will know which treatment he will got, what will be the outcome. This is already interesting data. We will collect the specimen. We will do some profiling depending on the funding, depending on the need. This will enrich a central biobank and clinical database from which we can already test some hypotheses. And when collaboration with the pharma industry, we can use that platform to refer patients to their clinical trial. Usually, the data from their clinical trial will also go back and enrich the SPECTA biobank. So we have a kind of ecosystem which is working well already according to the preliminary experience we have with it. So any question?
So thank you very much, Stephane, and thank you to all of our 4 case studies. Well, by a miracle, we are bang on time, so everybody must be congratulated for this. That's fantastic. So we now have 20 minutes for questions and open discussion. And what we've done here, of course, is we've gone from really quite broad down to a little bit less broad, looking at the transversal work that's going on relevant to all the ERNs. And we went really in depth with 4 of our networks to see some different approaches on what they are practically doing. And for some of them, actually, the issue is not so much what they are doing, it's kind of what they have been doing and what's worked very well and whether they can continue to do this under the ERN, and if so, how. So you may have questions specifically for those 4, I know I do, but also for some of this background activity too. So we have the floor open for questions. Who would like to start us off? Yes, I'm sorry, I don't know everybody's name yet. So if you can introduce yourself when you speak, and then the people following at home can catch too.
I'm Bart Leroy. I'm a geneticist and eye doctor. I represent ERNI. I have a general question for the 4 case study presenters. One of the issues that we've highlighted is actually the data entry is obviously an issue that costs money, because it costs time and we need to pay our employers, the HCPs, for us to do so. So from the experience of the speakers, how did you make sure that there was sufficient funding for the people who put data into registries that could then be used for the research presented?
Who would like to address this one? somebody talking about registries.
I can try to explain what we did through TREAT-NMD. So the registries are funded sometimes by patient organizations, but are also funded by the industry, in the sense, not directly, in the sense that if they want to know how many patients we are there in Europe and where they are in Europe, they will have to pay for that. And they will receive consolidated data. So none of the data that is offered or that is given to the industry has any identifiable data. And this has been like this for many years. And as you say, we need to have this funding, otherwise we cannot keep the registries going. There's no way we keep on.
Can I just follow up on that? Thank you very much for that. How did you in practice manage the flow of money? Because obviously we all have our ways of doing this. It is happening, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here, that money comes in through grants or through people from companies funding the research. How did you manage in general the flow of the money coming to the ERN that you represent?
So the money doesn't come to the ERN, okay? The money, the ERN makes use of the registries when we want to produce some sort of work, but we don't touch that money because that money is managed through TREAT-NMD. It's different. It has a different structure from EURO-NMD. We have an agreement. If I'm interested in an area, for instance, which I am, and there is a registry in the area that I work on, I can use the information. I ask for access to that information to the steering committee, and I don't pay because I'm an academic, and they will give me the data after the steering committee. But for industry, it's different. They will pay. They can, for instance, ask to the CTSR how many centers are there with more than, 100 patients with Duchenne. And the CTSR, according to their information, will give them that we have in Europe 15 centers that would correspond to that. And the CTSR receives the money that is important for them to keep their own structure and update the information they have.
Okay, so I think Luca had a comment next.
We have a slightly different structure, meaning that the registry are also, the support to the registry is sometimes also from patient organization, like the one that I was mentioning, meaning that the patient organization are willing to put a certain amount of money to support one person just for the data entry. And that's the only way to sustain this kind of possibility. Otherwise, it won't work. Then the point is that whenever we get request of data, what the kind of data that we are providing are the metadata that I showed you today. We will never provide personal data on specific patient because otherwise, I will go to jail. That's not the nicest place to stay. So, but I totally agree with you. Without a person that is sustained, that is paid to type the data, it won't work.
Thank you, Luca. Yeah, I think that system of, and for the neuromuscular networks and registries as well, that idea of actually having, curators for the registry. So in fact, companies are never directly contacting patients to ask for any information. They're never giving it back. It goes through a very well-structured committee, which has a code of conduct, and this is absolutely the way forward. I think MetabERN and then perhaps Stephane, and then we will move to a separate question.
Yeah, we have been granted by one of the 5 registries from the European Community with the Unified Inherited Metabolic Disorder. So this is actually already a platform that is unifying, starting 3 registries that were funded previously by the European Community, and we are lucky that the platform is the same, and it is the same platform that also another ERN is using. So we are starting to expand a little bit the registry. So This is something that how you to sustain the registry is something that we are discussing also at the coordinator level. Recently, we started to discuss about sustainability, and one of the priority that we put in the sustainability is indeed the registry maintenance, independently that they are registry across the ERNs or they are registries for the single ERNs. And we have more or less quantified also the amount of money that we need per year to maintain the 24, if we have 24 registries. So it's a discussion that will be brought from June on, from the next coordinator meeting, and will be faced not only inside but also with the Commission, because of course, for example, the 5 registries that have been funded have a startup money, but we need to discuss that in 3 years' time when the grant is gone. So it is indeed a major issue that we are facing, together with the patient organization, because we need to have not too much scattered ways how to maintain this registry. We need to uniform, and we need to bring all the ideas and to find one that can be really useful to ensure these registries. There are, however, already 600 registries in Europe. We need also to try how to deal with this, because there is an incredible amount of data there that are duplicated and sometimes are lost. So also this is another major issue that we should, at the ERN, discuss.
Thank you, Maurizio. I think, Jan, I don't know if you had a comment on Bot's question or a new question.
It's more a comment, because I think it's a good opportunity to go back to some elements already said in the past, but not perceived because it was not the right moment. It was probably too soon. So 2 elements. One is that I really draw the attention of everyone to what EURACAN just showed with EORTC. EORTC is a model that works since decades. We continue to ignore it as if it were only for cancer. It's a model we can transfer to rare disease at large. It's a model that EORTC is ready potentially to enlarge. SPECTA can be enlarged to other areas. That has been discussed already 2 years ago. ERN went nowhere because there was not enough trust, because when it is rare cancer, it's another world, but it's the same world. So I really would like that the working group research of ERNs, that the Commission and everybody really look more into it and try to be pragmatic rather than reinventing the wheel, to look at what works. Because in particular there is the question of conflict of interest, there is the informed consent, all of that is there. And that's my second comment, is that in the presentation by the Board of Member States, I continue to think that it's nonsense to don't have a common policy on conflict of interest. For me, it's just a way to get rid of the problem. I just delegate it to the ERNs, and then you have 24 different policy on conflict of interest. What does that mean? How is that going to work for EMA, for instance? How is that going to work with industry? So I think it's important to have something, so maybe Commission will comment, and maybe they're progressing toward a common format, which will make us happy after asking for that since certain time. But my third and maybe most important comment is a message both to the ERNs, but also to colleagues EGP, European Joint Programme Cofund, and to the Commission. There is something that could exist and works in some situation, which is the concept of clinical research networks. And if we were able, by the Commission, in the next framework program for research, to have funding dedicated to clinical research network within the ERN, then we will have a well-structured system. Today we have the ERNs, and we have the common infrastructures with the European Joint Programme Cofund. So all of that is in place. What is missing now is the money. The money in order to provide the human resources, to provide the time that was mentioned in previous presentations, the time to collect the data. And the experience is there. It's the experience of several projects funded by the EU on creating registries and collecting clinical data and genomic data and etc. And we know that works. We have the experience at the NIH in the US, where there is also clinical research network. So they didn't develop the European Funds Network. They did it from research part. And they're covering 300 diseases with permanent money, where they collect data on all patients for these diseases with registries to do, the minimum is that they have to do 2 minimum activities, like natural history study and registries, including obviously the genomic data. And then they are able, with common tools, to identify patients in few hours, to know how many patients for clinical trials, and to recruit them quickly, potentially. There may be questions that may be improved or not, and I'm not saying that we need as much money per disease as they do in the US, because we have a different structure. But at least if we had an approach like that, we would have financial resources to do it for all rare diseases within the European Funds Network, or at least for all clinical research network existing already, the 150 in the ERNs who are doing care, who could do research. We would also have similar processes rather than having different processes. And maybe we will stop this stupid waste of the 600 registries with data loss, with money loss, going nowhere. As we know, as we're trying to address since years, GRC is not much helping for the moment, but could do more. And with the EGP and GRC, maybe we could have that. Thank you.
We are always grateful to hear these messages. Thank you very much, Jan. I will firstly answer on the point of the Board of Member States statement. Maybe it was when you were outside of the room, but Vicky reported this morning there is, on the side of the coordinators, a working group on ethics, which is working on a common documents for the conflict of interest policy. So there is work there. It's not the task of the board to do for now the details of what the coordinators need. I think the coordinators are a better place to start drafting this, and they are doing it, actually. This is not finalized. Maybe it's going too slow as a flavor out some, but I think it's very important to coordinate, to let the time to the networks and to the coordinators to get there together and to think carefully, thoroughly on what they need and also what is the state of play. And yes, so that's where we are. And I think also it's important to understand that there are different working groups, like the working group on research, largely represented today. And certainly there need to be interferences as well, work together. So that's the point. On clinical research networks, I don't know if Daria, Euro, or others in the room would like to build upon the point. We have understood your messages. I see maybe it's another question. And I will let also Eileen from the Board of Member States answer.
Well, just about the question about the conflict, I mean, I think we looked at the different policies, and there's the EFPIA position for open disclosure, but that is not consistently accepted by all Member States. So we think that we're back to the coordinators having a consensus opinion. So we agree with that. It was quite challenging. Just a second point I want to emphasise about the support for clinical research. We had actually workshop in Ireland, and EURO was there, and it's a massive problem for researchers or clinicians to have protected time. And I think from France, we heard already at the ECRG that for the Banque de Données and for the registry that the government actually provides that infrastructure support. And I think that's an approach for healthcare providers that are going to be involved in ERNs, that there may be some endorsement or some approval for member states to have that funding for research, because it isn't there for, I know many of my colleagues have the same problem. It came out in the MetabERN. It's very challenging. Thanks.
May I add? Antonio Piga, Euroblanet. Just a comment to highlight that the lack of funding meets ethics. And so public funding of registry is very important to prevent potential but very true, because there is documentation, bias from industry on registries on rare disease, because the priorities on registry, which registry and what to collect, may be driven by industry instead of a public interest. So public funding of registry and ethics are the same point to me.
Before passing the word, there is one thing I would like to say. Of course, you will continue to argue there is a lack of money, and we know for research and registries you need a lot of money. But still, I would like to remind what I told this morning already. ERNs are a construction based on voluntary participation of member states, which means as well participation in terms of funding and supporting the hospital, the members. And actually, for an EU initiative in the field of healthcare, actually ERNs are already very well served. I'm not saying it's enough. I'm saying we also probably need to make a proof of the concept before moving towards more EU funding. So, but on the other hand, you heard from EURO and others, there are already EU funding put at the disposal of ERNs through Solve RD and many other projects. So I'm not discouraging you. I'm just saying we also need to make a proof of concept. And there is actually, so far, a huge public funding at different levels. Huh? So this should not be disregarded. This is already happening.
Sorry, gentlemen, if you say your name again, I apologize.
Thanks. Dan O'Connor, the UK representative on COMP. So there were some really nice presentations in terms of generating new data, particularly the clinical trial I picked up on, and there was mentioned collaboration with industry. But what wasn't mentioned was collaboration with the regulators or the EMEA or scientific advice. And I think it's really important, and one of the challenges is to generate data that's acceptable to multiple stakeholders, so not only the regulators, but also the payer and the HTA bodies. So I wonder whether there's been any experience with the ERNs in terms of either coming for scientific advice to the EMEA or a national competent authority, or any approach that could be brought forward in terms of ensuring that any data that is generated can be acceptable to the maximum number of stakeholders. Thanks.
Okay, maybe Luca, if you want to just comment on that quickly, and then Anna.
As you have seen in the slide that I was presenting, when you're speaking about regulators, most of the ERN coordinators were speaking about national agency and not EMA. That's a message, meaning that it's clear that we are lacking this kind of contact. And that's the reason why we have decided to have this meeting today. Meaning that we need to find, to build actually, because it's, according to the data that we have collected, it's missing because 8 out of 24 we're thinking about connection with EMA or have had a connection with EMA. So that means that we need to build this kind of strategy, and probably this meeting is is the first attempt to set up a sort of a continuous path in this direction in order to have a good opportunity that the mutual interaction will build not only the strengths of the ERN, but also provide opportunities to EMA.
And Anna, you had a comment?
Yes, I have several comments. The first one is that several questions that have raised here are really to be discussed in depth in our discussions tomorrow, especially around data compliance with data, compliance of data with regulators' quality standards from the beginning. But I want to follow up on Jan's comment on clinical research networks for several reasons. One main topic that is emerging here is how to not reinvent the wheel and how to ERNs can mutualize and adopt widely things that are already existing. So Jan mentioned the SPECTA from EORTC, which is I totally agree is a perfect thing, and that is something that we will push into the European Joint Programme EGP for Rare Disease in Pillar 4 to be generalized, but also in the frame of clinical research networks that hopefully will be pushed by a task force in ERDIRC, is the fact that the Treat-NMD initiative that we have already heard about could be generalized, because we need to know which in each ERNs, which are the centers that are in the capacity to conduct, that are ready for clinical trials. So that is something that is already existing that can be extended as well. And regarding registries, again, we need to have for ERNs common structures and common data standards and common facilities, and that is something that will be pushed in the HAP and in Pillar 2 already. But the most important thing for me is that the clinical research networks will, and the ERNs force in that, is that will maybe allow for diseases that are not even benefiting for any clinical research to emerge. Clinical trials and orphan drugs are now just available for less than 5% of rare diseases. So the thing with clinical research networks is really to make emerge a critical mass for those diseases that are completely neglected. And I think that that is also the focus that we need to have in our discussions, because it's exactly in line with the ERDIC new goals of developing 1,000 new therapies, and for diseases that have any developed already. That's all.
Thank you very much, Anna. We're going to stop in a couple of minutes so we can have a decent lunch break, but I think last quick comments from Dieter and then Luca. Yep.
Okay, my point is quite a little bit different, because I realized that all the physicians like to discuss about guidelines. This is a main driver for clinical trials. And the small population clinical trial guideline is rather old. And following up the workshop we had with the Asterix Inspire and Ideal project last year, I wonder if what is the status about the revision of the guideline. So, because that is very important also for Daniel, for the comp work, and for other workers.
Thank you very much, Dieter, and maybe actually one of our colleagues this afternoon, when we go into more detail about the different EMA activities, can touch upon this, and this is also very relevant to Daniel's comments. Luca, I think you had the...
No, just to highlight something that Anna was mentioning, and that has been highlighted also by the questionnaire. One of the topics that most of the respondents to the questionnaire were highlighting is epidemiology, meaning lack of information on the incidence and prevalence of a disease. If we are missing this data, it will be impossible to set up any kind of clinical trial, because no one will put money, sorry to say that very openly, in something that is completely unknown. So I think that we need to carefully prepare those steps, and that also applies to what Jan was mentioning. I mean, it's true. I mean, the risk that we are running is that we will have good clinical trial just for those diseases that are already well known. So it's really important. I totally agree that it's important to set up a sort of a infrastructure for setting up the clinical trial, but it's absolutely important if we don't want to have a series, a premiere series, and a second series of rare disease, to encourage also the aspect of the natural history study. That is one of the topics that I think should be really mentioned in the discussion tomorrow, because if we want to find money to encourage also the natural history study, we will never have in the future any kind of clinical trial.
Thank you, Luca. Very last quick comment from Maurizio, then we go for lunch.
Yeah, extremely well, quick comment, just to reinforce a little bit what Jan was saying. Jean-Michel was presenting just one part of the survey. We have also another part regarding the knowledge of infrastructure inside the ERNs. And I would like really to stress the need to have the infrastructure known by the providers, because we had really an incredible surprise that the most common infrastructures that are participating to the EGP were almost not known. So we should start from here in order not to have this decuplication of things, that is a loss of data. So this is an opportunity for us to do.
Completely agree, Maurizio. I think, we said at the beginning the ERNs are so vast and they have so many responsibilities. And for some people, some of the coordinators, some of the players in the HCPs, they developed, they invented, they were a forming member of these things. For others, that's not the case, but everybody has something they can contribute. And actually, I think we're still at this crucial time where we really do need to look practically at what we have. And we've already got some very nice practical proposals, which is great, which we can actually discuss in more detail, especially tomorrow. We can keep these things on the table and really explore, will this work? And some of this is actually just clarifying what's being created in terms of things like the conflict of interest. You know, for some people, this is very, very clear, but for others who are not in that inner circle, sometimes it's not so clear. So I think if we can continue to clarify what we can clarify, and to get some of our practical proposals on the table for further discussion tomorrow, that would be fantastic. So we were still in session 2, which is very much focused on ERNs and how they can add value to clinical research. And we have a final presentation, which is on the topic of patient expectations for meaningful engagement in ERN-related clinical research. And here we are delighted to have 2 EPAG advocates. You remember that the EPAGs are the European Patient Advocacy Groups. So we have Russell Wheeler, who is an EPAG representative for ERNI, and
we have Alain Cornet, which is an EPAG representative for ERN RECONNECT.
Hi, I think we have to be quite quick. They told me I was too boring to do 10 minutes all on my own, so I'm going to do 5 minutes and hand over to Alan, who will speak for 10 minutes because he's not so boring, and then I'll finish up with a few more comments at the end, if I can. So, patient expectations for meaningful engagement in ERNs. Here at the European Medicines Agency, I have to say that, I think later this afternoon we'll probably hear a little about the evolution of EMA's work with patients, and I know that I've seen a lot of slides before. I've had experience, many of us have had experience with EMA, and I have to say that I would give EMA at least 9 out of 10. EMA really gets patient involvement, and to a large extent, patients are embedded in most processes at EMA. It can always be improved, but everything is capable of improvement. Sadly, it's not the case outside of EMA. And if we take both edges, if you put EMA as a sandwich in the middle, actually, then in the research field, in the research field, patient involvement in research is the exception rather than the rule. Patients are treated as part of the product rather than part of the process. And if we go to the other side of the sandwich, the HTA process, it's also true that in HTA, patients are not very much involved. There are 1 or 2 exceptions, but in many member states, the HTA process takes place without any patient involvement at all. What exactly is patient engagement? For many people, if we say, I think a lot of people are saying, yes, we understand that patients need to be involved. You're really important to us because you understand the disease. Well, I'm actually in the ERNI, but as many of you may have noticed, I don't have any visual impairment myself, so I can't speak from any great personal understanding of the disease. This is flicking about. But I do feel I've still got something to offer, and the patient involvement, I believe, comes from many different facets. And to take just a few of them, we come from very different backgrounds. And so in the ERNs, many of the patient members of the patient advisory groups will have experience in management, in marketing, in finance, and other areas, all of which can be valuable to the network. Those skills are also valuable when it comes to trials and research. But the other thing that I think is much more important is that patients are the only people who are really involved throughout the whole continuum of the medicines and treatment development process. We are involved and interested at every single stage. Coming back to HTA that I mentioned before, I hope everyone here in this room is familiar with the term, but even within the ERN, I think you'll find there are a lot of HCPs who will scratch their head when you mention the term ERN. We're involved at that stage, and it's important when looking at even the basic research to have an understanding of what is going to happen at the other end.
Otherwise, the risk is that we keep continually developing treatments that never actually reach the market. And I didn't set a watch, but so I...
That's fine.
Well, I think that's as much as I need to say on that now.
Yeah. So important for patients to be involved end to end and not just at the time of the trial. And that comes obviously with identifying at the beginning what is important to be treated and therefore what are the various outcomes to be measured. And I'm separating their outcomes to be measured to define if the trial was a success and outcome to be measured, because that's really what we care for, because I understand all the statistics coming in there make that a little more complicated. But to really have meaningful patient engagement in the clinical trial, and where the ERN can definitely help, is we need to have educated patients. So you need to have patients, obviously, which remain patients. They are experts in their own disease, and that is what they bring to the table. They are not pseudo-doctors and so on, and that's the worst thing we could get is patients that believe they know more than they are doctors when it comes to a clinical trial. But we need patients that can speak the language, that can understand what is said, that understand enough about what clinical trial is, how it works, what makes success, what makes failure, so that they can contribute to the clinical trial from the beginning in the design. And there are a lot of programs today that give that, and we have the EUPATI program, the EURORDIS program, which are very high level, very demanding, and high quality, but we need more patients involved, and we need the base patients involved. That means programs in local languages, but also programs run by the local patient associations so that the patients can represent truly their community. Because otherwise patients go with their own knowledge of their own disease, which might be a little different than what the other people in their group experience. If they bring the voice of all patients suffering from that disease, then they need to have also an understanding of the disease mechanism and the various experiences that can exist. And so I think that there is a need there to broaden and to have more patients being trained so that they can participate in research. And very interesting, as Russell mentioned about HTA, we also need to train patients to provide input in HTA, which is completely different and which requires another level of training. So training for patients is important. Now, while there are programs to train patients to participate in research program, what we also miss is programs to train researchers, regulators, doctors on how to involve patients in the program. Many of them have no clue what the patients can contribute. So they bring them because they've been told you need to have 3 patients on your board, but sharing with them, here is where they can contribute. Here are success stories. Here is what patients can contribute in the design of your clinical trial. Explaining them how to raise the right questions, the questions that don't suggest the answers they would like to get, because most of the patients have a very high respect for their doctors. And if the doctor says this is the right answer, they might lean towards that, whereas they could contribute a lot more by giving their opinion and giving their experience, and then the doctor might review their own considerations. So there is also a need to have training program for people which organize the research, for the researchers, for the doctors, so that they can get the best of the patient's contribution. So there is really that mirroring aspect that need to be there, and that's very, very important. So that answers the first question which we were giving, which is what are our patients for meaningful engagement in ERN-related clinical research. The second question we had was, what is our perspective on added value that the ERN can bring in research? And we had, obviously, we didn't just make this the 2 of us, we had discussions with all our colleagues from the EPAGs, and there are fundamentally 2 messages that were coming. And the first message is ERN can help harmonize, and we need to have harmonized ERNs for them to deliver the best. What does that mean? Well, if each ERN goes in completely different roads, then we might miss any of the common best approaches, any of the common practices that could help to cross-fertilize. So there is a benefit in ERNs engaging on common denominators wherever they can bring synergies. And at the same time, the other big message was, but watch out, each of the ERN needs to have enough freedom in the way they are moving with that, in the priorities that they are setting, in the way they execute, because each of these diseases are different, and the start from place is very different. And therefore, we need to make sure that we leave enough flexibility in the ERN to really progress based on low-hanging fruits, which are different in each of the items that they are covering. So that was the second biggest message, so that balance of, oh, where can we have common grounds? And for example, registries, which we talked this morning about mutualizing knowledge, about current best approaches and so on. All that is definitely part of that first bucket. And we have a perspective on added value there because it can simplify the work of the other ERNs if we can migrate that knowledge from one to another. And the second bucket is really within that choice menu, with those tools, how do we focus on where we can improve the best in each of the ERNs. Now going there and providing some more specific example, there are two, and I'm going to talk the first one. And the first one is really, ERN is wonderful for patients because suddenly we are one family across total Europe, instead of being distinct families almost by location, sometimes by national geography. And the big item that we saw was for research is more patients can be part of research. And today, if you look at various disease areas, only a small fraction of patients actually participates in research because they don't have the opportunity, they live too far from the hospital where it takes place, or the research that fits them is not taking place in their geography. And so you have a large part of the population that could be added into the research and isn't because there is no local contact for it. And so the concept there, which is a dream concept, is to bring clinical trial to patients rather than bringing patients to clinical trials. And that sounds so close to the ERN concept of bringing really the treatment to the patients rather than having patients travel across borders. We need to achieve the same for clinical trials. And I think that there is a big role for the ERN, but there is also a huge role for EMA to make that happen. Because today we have each of these national legislations very prescriptive. It's so complicated to add a site onto a clinical research. We need to make sure that when a clinical research is in an ERN at one place, patients from any other ERN can join that research. And that might be a big exercise to pull it, but if the people in this room really want to make it happen, at least that's the only possibility it's going to happen. So if you don't try, it's not going to happen. So that's a very important message. We need to make that happen because then we can make it work. We can have more patients join. And it is critical for more than one thing, but the ERN can help because they will share common tools, common diagnosis tool, common way of looking at that. They have the platform to talk about specific cases. So why can't they do it? So that is the first big one. The second big one is ERN can also pool the tools to make sure that we validate diagnosis before patients enter into clinical trials. And today we see too many clinical trials. I'm coming from Lupus Europe, where many clinical trials have failed. Well, some of those trials probably have failed because the diagnosis at start was not solidly enough established. And when people move to best standards of care, they improve. The placebo effects are huge with lupus. And that's because we need to have better assessment of diagnosis of patients before they enter in a clinical trial. And there also the ERNs can help in selecting the right patient for the right trial, regardless of the location of the trial, finding the right patient for the right trial. So that's the first big one. And Russell, you're going to close.
Thank you. Yeah, the second point, maybe I better hold that. The second point is about the infrastructure. And for me, every ERN is different and each faces different challenges from the various disease groups that they encompass. But despite those differences and the fact that they're likely to evolve in different ways, they still need to remain recognizable as an ERN and to have some form of harmonization, which is important not only for management and oversight, but also for measurement of effectiveness. I read an interview the other day from an eminent physician who was a member of one of the ERNs, and he was asked what he sees ERNs looking like in 10 years' time. He responded that he hoped they wouldn't be necessary in 10 years' time because at that point, everyone will have moved up to the point where they've reached the same level of harmonization. I suspect that he knew that this was a utopian view and was a little tongue-in-cheek. And as science continues to progress, we're always going to need centers of excellence that push the boundaries. But more importantly to me
if we think about, or if I think about the area in which I believe that ERNs are uniquely positioned to offer a common infrastructure, is an area that has underpinned a lot of our discussions today, which is the area of registries. Collaboration in research existed well before ERNs. It will continue to exist outside of ERNs, but it strikes me that the ERNs almost are uniquely structured to offer the ideal balance of credibility, patient involvement, HCP involvement, and a natural home for registries on which everything else is going to be built. And so for me, my major focus on ERNs, and the reason I actually joined the ERNs as a patient advisor member, is because of this potential for being the natural home for rare disease registries in Europe. EMA's work on pilot registries shows that EMA takes this very seriously, and in fact, I think there are few real answers. I was interested to hear about some of the best practices like TREAT-NMD and the other registries we heard about a little earlier, but these are the exceptions. And for most rare diseases, there is absolutely nothing, and we're building castles on sand unless we get that right. Thank you. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Russell and Eileen, for another duet. Fantastic. Do we have questions for Russell and, yep, Mark?
Hi, my name is Mark Turner. I'm a neonatal paediatrician from Liverpool, and I co-lead an RMI2 project called Connect for Children. And this is aiming to do many of the things using children as a case study that can be generalized in other settings. At the center of what we want to do is listen to the voices of children and young people through what we would call YPAGs, not EPAGs, but young people's advisory groups. And so we hope that the EPAGs can discuss things with YPAGs, and when we have children and young people who want to contribute to the trial process in exactly the same way that you've outlined, we hope that the groups that we've had success with can share their lessons with children and young people across Europe. And maybe each ERN could have a young people's advisory group as well as a one for people who are less young. And the second point I'd like to make is that a lot of the issues that you're talking about, moving trials between countries, we want to pilot that with respect to pediatrics, at least through national hubs. So we have 19 national hubs that will help overcome all of those problems, because some of the problems inevitably are going to be at the national level with the way that our competencies are divided between member states and the European Union. So we're working on that in many ways, and clearly there's a massive overlap between pediatrics and rare diseases, and this is a fantastic opportunity to come and learn from the achievements of the ERNs. Thank you.
I'm not sure what I can say in response to that, quite honestly, but obviously the door is wide open. I don't know whether Virginie or Jan want to add something, because the pediatric aspect is something that is very actively being looked at, but not an area that I feel I have a great knowledge at the moment.
Yeah, no, so Virginie Ver from Eurodis. I can just comment on what Mark just said, that we are fully aligned, and because Eurodis is also part of C4C project, so it's obviously something that we will build up in the course of the project for sure.
Virginie, if I can just add, it would be actually very interesting if Eurodis could give guidance to patient organizations on what we can do. We organized a youth panel just 10 days ago to understand what it is living with lupus when you're young, but we had to restrict ourselves to the 18+. And half of them had started lupus when they were children, but we could not invite them because of legal reasons and complexities to have them come together and so on. And so I think understanding what we can do with young people would be a huge help. Just fact sheet guidance on how to involve them.
We start at 8 and finish at 18, and exactly. There is a body of guidance that maybe we could share through Eurodis.
Yep, there's a question at the back there.
Yeah, Ad Schuurman. Yeah, thank you. I fully agree that the ERNs are a suitable place for registries. Do you think, as a patient organization, that that's also good to see if we can build and use that registry also for regulatory, HTA and payer organizations? So do it at once in a good way. Do you favor that, or is that too fantastic?
It's not only not too fantastic, I think it's essential personally. I've been trying to figure out how to establish a registry in my particular disease area for about 5 years now. Attended workshops and classes, spoken to lots of people who have registries, those looking to set them up, and I yet to find a model that I thought was one that I really felt comfortable following. And then when I discovered ERNs, I had a eureka moment. I thought, this is where we should be doing it. This is a natural home. You need the international dimension, you need the credibility, and you need the trust. And I think that the ERNs have the potential to fulfill all of those. And it makes no sense whatsoever to have multiple registries for the same condition. There are multiple different needs to be taken from the registry, but it's far better that they all come from a single registry per disease, or however it's structured, rather than having a different registry for regulation, a different one for HTA. And I just see the ERNs as the natural guardian of that.
Maybe a question for Russell and Ilan, if I may. So I think that the EPAG role, and I think this the more and more I hear people talking about the EPAG experience, is really a very complex one, since, as you said, some of these networks, they cover many, many hundreds, sometimes thousands of conditions, and there are, of course, a limited number of you, and I think this responsibility, it comes across very clearly when people present and they speak, that in fact you're not simply speaking from your own experiences, that when you're in this EPAG role, you are in fact aware that you're in a sense sort of representing a very broad community, and that you're doing this across all these different areas like guidelines and registries and clinical trials and everything else. I just wondered what your perspectives are on how the network can facilitate this. Is it, easier to involve patient organizations as well? How do we get more of a diverse spread? How do we keep the EPAG enterprise going so that in fact you don't have to speak with 1,000 hats or speak for 1,000 voices, that you can share the burden a little, I suppose? I just wondered if you had any thoughts. It's maybe a difficult question to answer.
Well, I can certainly talk from the Reconnect side, where we have fundamentally we've divided in 3 big groups, which are more similar than across the total Reconnect in terms of disease areas. And then in each, we are really having more than one EPAG. They connect regularly with the others, and the patient organizations has been mapped for total Europe. So we have the map of all patient organizations. And then whenever something is coming up as a question, we relay it to the total community through the patient organizations to collect their feedback. So we are now trying to find what exists in terms of therapeutic education material. We go through all of our member groups, or the groups we could identify. In some cases, for some diseases, there is no member group. And then we try to identify individuals in various countries so that we can get that. And it's amazing the response we get once we reach the right places. I mean, the first month, I think, have been very difficult. But last month, we were looking, we have 2 disease areas where we did not have any patient representatives. And then we've put all our forces, everybody started to take the phone and call, and we now have 12 for those 2 areas, so which means that really we can reach out. But each time we insist, you're not representing yourself, you're representing the group. Therefore, make sure you stay connected with the group.
Fantastic. Any other questions for Alan and Russell, or indeed for any of our participants on the topic of patient involvement in ERN-led or ERN-associated research? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dimitrios Athanasiou from the PDCO. Russell, I would like to ask you, where do you see the patient involvement when it comes to data sharing of the registry that you envision inside these registries, inside the ERNs?
Data selling, did you say?
Sharing.
Selling to sharing. Oh, sharing. Sorry. Well, I mean, our involvement really needs to be at the level of supervising rather than the supervisory and setting up of the registries to ensure the patient's interests are monitored. I'm not sure I really understand the question. You might have to help me there, Dimitrios.
I was thinking that in the governance, for example, of the registry, because the data is basically patients' data, so we own the data. So we have to have access to the registries, you have to be involved in the governance, and you have even to contribute data, because a lot of patient organizations have serious data to contribute. And when we're talking about rare diseases, I'm sure that the patient organizations should be a key player in the data in the registry in general. So I was just trying to explore where you see the patient view in your ERN.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with all of that. At every stage, we need to be involved, and even in terms of inputting the data as well on a patient level, although that needs to be verified through some process. Yeah, I mean, in every aspect of the management of it, because we want to be sure that we're collecting the right data that is relevant to the research questions that are coming forward. And that comes back a little bit to the thing I touched on earlier on about patients being involved at every step of the medicine's development journey, because sometimes when you're setting up the data for a registry, I think you've got to try and conceive what questions are we going to want to ask in 3 years' time when this research we're doing goes before regulators, and what are the questions we're going to need to ask when that data comes up for payers and HTA agencies who will need certain things answering before they're going to be willing to sign off on reimbursement. And so this holistic aspect of patient involvement, I think, is needed at every stage, and certainly in setting up registries.
If I may again, Russell and Alan, I think that I really like the comments about training patients and supporting patients to participate in research, and I also really like the training researchers to properly involve patients. And in fact, Mark was mentioning the new C4C Connect for Children initiative around pediatric clinical trial networks. This was a comment which came up very strongly there, in fact, as well at the kickoff meeting, that it should go both ways. Thinking about training for patients, so training and understanding regulatory procedures and understanding how you can engage in trials. I'm thinking about what we have out there. So we have the EURORDIS Summer School, which is very well established and is successful. We now have the EURORDIS Winter School, which is also, I was fortunate to participate in that this year, and it was a wonderful experience. We have activities, hopefully under the EJP, around training and to continue and to expand and to roll out these sorts of initiatives more and more. We will have pediatric-focused training, again for patients, but also for researchers under the C4C network. So we have all these bits and pieces of the puzzle. So one thing is, and this is not just for the two of you, it's for the whole room, I guess we need to think about how we make sure everyone's aware of these, because I'm sure that not everyone in this room is aware of all of these things. I'm sure that not everybody in the almost 1,000 HCPs involved in ERNs are aware of all these things. So one thing is, how do we really make people aware of what's there? And then what's missing? When it comes to training patients, when it comes to training researchers, do we have or will we have everything we actually need when all of these things get going? Where are our gaps still? Is it a case of just rolling out and training more people? Or are there fundamental areas that we're missing to all of this? This is open to anybody who is happy enough to comment on this.
Can I just quickly mention, you've not mentioned EUPATI, which I guess was an oversight rather than a deliberate omission. And there is also not only the summer and winter schools at Eurodis, but now there is a body of training information on the website. EUPATI also not only has the cohorts of people going through the programme, and that has an issue over sustainability going forwards, but they do have a huge body of work that is available also online. So one of the things we need to do, and I'm guilty as much as anybody else of not doing it properly yet, is to make sure that everyone is aware of what is there and signposting. I think within the EPAGs, we need to do a lot more to, especially as we get new EPAG members joining, to help them access some of these materials and probably mentor them in going through that, because just pointing someone to a website and saying, go and read about it, isn't going to be good enough. The problem is, this is all overwhelming. I'm actually retired and have more time available than most. Quite a lot of the EPAG members are full-time employed elsewhere, but even I find it quite overwhelming at times. And so where we fall short, it's sometimes because we just haven't had the time, and obviously the clinicians involved in the networks face that problem on a daily basis also. So, we've got a long list of things that we need to address, and that's certainly amongst them.
Lots of hands. Yeah. Who's next? Yep.
Just adding a little bit on that, and definitely there are all these initiatives. One of the issues is to find out where to start. For many patients, you have so much, and the EUPATI program online is great, but it's like, I have here 1,000 different things I could follow. Which one? There is a second part which is quite important, is all these programs are very much reaching international patients. And the question is, how do we reach the people that don't speak English, that need to have something in their local language, that need to be close? And there are some programs which are there, but we still have a lot of gaps there in terms of identifying and how to provide it locally. And I think if the ERN could have in their geographies a program for people which are nearby, which can be much more, direct, face-to-face, answering to the questions and so on, rather than following and trying to follow something, that would be definitely a great addition. So local programs, and then disease-specific or disease area-specific information, that is also one of the big musts. So if you are in ReConnect, all these diseases, what are the commonalities and so on, and that obviously can't be provided outside of the ERN, it needs to be ERN-specific.
I think, Isabel, you had a comment?
Yeah, we do have also specific trainings for the involvement of patients into regulatory activities, and we have different levels. Of course, we have information on our website. There is a wealth of information for patients on the website. We do organize a general training every year, one-day training at the agency. But each time we have a new patient involved in the specific activities, there is a one-to-one dedicated to this patient to explain a little bit about the agency and what is the process, what is expected from them, who are the people they are going to meet, and so on. So this could also be an example to be looked at.
Thank you, Isabel. And indeed, I think the EMA got a good a good approval rating at the beginning of that presentation as somewhere where lots of good practices are being embedded. We don't have a terribly large amount of time. I've just started I've planted a bomb of loads of discussion topics. But I think Virginie, you had a comment, or Inez? Yeah. Or perhaps, sorry, the lady behind is first in the white. If you just introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Beverly Power, and I'm a patient organisation that works within the ERNICA group, specifically for congenital diaphragmatic hernia. One of the things I was going to have a little bit of input on is we learn organically with regards to the research process simply by funding research ourselves as a charity organisation. And one of the things we found extremely helpful was real-time experience. We were invited to the laboratories at the Institute for Child Health to actually have a look round the laboratories, to meet some of the researchers, and it was extremely, it was a really fruitful experience. And we felt that we learnt a lot more by being a little bit more hands-on than just looking at a computer screen and going through modules continuously. So it was a very useful experience. And maybe something like a mentoring program where we could get perhaps one of the healthcare providers to mentor patients and patient organisations and invite them into the research facility. I mean, obviously, I realise that there are implications with regards to confidentiality, but at least to real-time show the patients what the process looks like, how it begins, you know, how it progresses and how it ends. Just an idea.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Beverly. And actually, we're coming up with some great ideas to advance tomorrow in our session, discussion session 3. Just before we close this session, I think Virginie or Inez, you had a comment? Yeah.
It's a quick one. So, so as Alain has very clearly explained, EPECs, they have a, you know, everyone expects a lot from them. And they really expect them to behave in a professional way, to respond to emails quickly, as quickly as possible, to contribute meaningfully. So expectations are very high, and we are aware of that. We are developing a training program to address their needs, but we have to be aware, I think, that not all of them will be, you know, leaders. So there's different needs depending on the level of involvement. So the 2 dimensions that Alain was mentioning, the local, you know, local needs, that needs to be covered, as well as those that are more active at the international level. So I think that whatever we do, you know, from the EURD's, EUPATI's side, and the ERNs do, because they are also, I guess all of them thinking about how to train their patients, we need to kind of complement each other. And I think, you know, we need to think about who we are going to target with each of these programs, because otherwise we'll be just, you know, duplicating work.
Any last comment, very quick, from Maurizio?
Yeah, very last comment on the ERN side. Because, I mean, on the ERN, there is a lot of expectation for the patients. And the patient organization is another ERN for itself in each ERN. Because, I mean, in the MetabERN, we have 44 patient organizations to start. This means that we need to organize not only, I mean, I like very much the presentation, but we really need to work for the organization, for the governance, and to understand that everything that is done by the EPAG then has to be transferred to the people that are not EPAG. That means that every meeting and awareness that is done on the EPAG need to be also disseminated to the other. This is always going to a matter of money, because the family organization wants to participate and has the need to participate to the ERN, but we do not have funds to fund the organization, especially when there are so many. So we really need to find a way to have the collaboration for the patient exactly like the providers. A lot of patients do not speak English, and we need to have money for the translation of documents. I mean, I hear from the family organization that there is a lot of expectation from me as coordinator, but I don't have the tools to help now the family as I would like. So at this point, we need to work together in order to find these tools. Where, I don't know, but even to translate the things would be extremely useful. So let's speak about courses, let's speak about everything, but let's speak also about basic things that still we are missing in order to tune up the 2 words, because so far we were just very much distinct words, and now we have to go on a single one. A very practical comment, but I mean, I have these things every day, so.
I agree. You were looking at me all the time. I agree with what you've said. And what Alain has just explained so easily, how they reach out to patient organizations outside the EPAC. I think, I mean, it's just a great example of how they do it. No, not all of them are at that point. And I know that for in your case, it's a big challenge. But it can, you know, it exists and it can be done.
Thank you very much for these fruitful discussions. We see the usefulness of it. This is work in progress. This is not the end of the story, but we have started. Before handing over the chair to Isabel and Luca, I just would like to say, since I still have the word, big thanks to EMA colleagues for hosting and organizing the workshop, but also this is the last workshop of a long series, and I really would like to acknowledge and thank the RD Action people, and in particular Vicky, for organizing this workshop. This is really impressive, your work, and we are really grateful, and I'm sure I'm not speaking only in behalf of DG Santé, but of many people in the room, so I would like actually a big applause for Vicky and the team.